one's means and purpose in life. So tonight, Dr. George will be integrating his work and talking to the current problem of suicide amongst health professionals in Australia. Please put your hands together for Dr. George Blair-West.
That was so accurate, I could have written it myself. Now, if you were surprised to hear me speaking tonight about the not so uplifting subject of suicide, then you're not as surprised as I was to be asked to come and speak about the not so uplifting subject of suicide. But here I am, and my job is to inform and interest you. Your job, your mission indeed, if you choose to accept it, is to pay attention, and if I do my job well enough, hopefully we'll finish at the same time. Now, firstly I want to say thanks to the organisers for asking me down here. I did grow up in Brisbane, but I grew up on the outskirts of Brisbane. I had my own horse. I spent a lot of time jackarooing out in the west, outside of Longreach at a sheep station called Inaugral. And I learned a few important things out in the country. I think the first one was get on well with your neighbour, because professional help is a long time coming. I learnt that one fighting bushfires. The second thing I learnt, sitting in the front of a Land Rover, fidgeting with a rifle, when it went off and the bullet flew just past my ear and punctured a very neat hole in the roof of the cab, was, well, the farmer who just kind of wandered around, no hurry, stuck his head in the window and said, "You left a live one in the chamber, didn't you, George?" The second thing I learned was don't leave a live round in the chamber. And the third thing I learned was that rain is more valuable than gold. And I'd just like to acknowledge what the farmers are going through at the moment in terms of the drought that we're all experiencing. It's become an issue in terms of the subject I'm going to be talking about tonight. And it's interesting to see that Scott Morrison has made drought his first priority. By the way, could somebody let me know if by the end of the night we have a different Prime Minister, please? Tonight you're going to hear an unusual story. It's not just going to be my story, you're also going to hear from one of the local vets here. We're going to be talking about this issue of suicide amongst professionals and mental health issues that sit around that. Can I just start by asking, how many vets do we have in the audience here tonight? Just by a show of hands? Okay. Okay. And what about vet nurses? Okay. Do we have any human nurses? The first time I heard that, it was a patient who was a vet, and she said, "I have this friend who's a human nurse." And I thought, wow, they must be safer than those pesky alien nurses. Do we have any human doctors in the room? Pharmacists?
Which is the noun?
Any farmers in the room? Okay. Because what I'm going to be talking about tonight affects all of these professions. I'm going to be talking about a little word, just a little 6-letter word, that is killing professionals in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes it's killing them emotionally, other times it's killing them physically. Sometimes it's doing both. That word is stress. Now, if you think that that's an overstatement, let me talk a bit about my profession in medicine. This has become such a big issue in Australia that only a few months ago, the College of Physicians, not the College of Psychiatry, but the College of Physicians published a paper simply called Suicide and Depression Amongst Medical Practitioners in Australia. And what they found was that there are 3 groups that are particularly overrepresented in that data. The first are medical students, which is completely new. The second are young doctors, and the third are female doctors. Now, what's going on? I'm just going to read you a quote from that paper that takes us into this issue. Medical students, young doctors and females, the population groups understood to be at the highest risk of suicide, also report the highest rates of stress and burnout. Long work hours, substantial workload, a high level of responsibility and a fear of making mistakes are characteristic of medical practice and are likely to contribute directly to work stress and burnout. What's burnout? Burnout is just prolonged stress. And there's a progression. It goes stress, burnout, depression, suicide. Now, it's the female doctor issue there that is the real standout. I mean, all of these statistics are tragic, but there's something happening here that is changing, and it's changing dramatically. It's not a little bit. Then I started to look at the data around veterinarians. It's exactly the same. There are more female vets killing themselves than male vets. Now, that's in a profession that already has 4 times the rate of suicide over the general population, twice that of other health professions. What's going on? Well, this relates to my own research. What I did very quickly back in the 90s when we looked at this, we found that the suicide rate in depression had been greatly exaggerated. I won't go into the details, simply to say that the people who they were studying were the people who were in hospital because they were easy to find. When you want to run a study, they're expensive, so find the people who are easy to get to. So they just looked at the number of people who killed themselves when they were in hospital. Guess why you admit somebody who's depressed? Because they're suicidal. So what we found was that they'd grossly overestimated the suicide rate. They said it was 15%. Every textbook said that. The true number was 3.4%. Now here's the rub. That 3.4%, because you've got to remember 17% of the population get depressed. I'm not talking mildly depressed, I'm talking what we call major depression. 17% of the entire population will at some point experience major depression. But when we looked at that figure of 3.4%, and in our second paper published in 1999, we dug a little deeper, and what we found was that figure was an average of 2 completely disparate results. The figure for men was 7%, and the figure for women was only 1%. Now, look at what we're talking about happening now, just in these last 20 years. We're now reversing completely that trend in the professions. The professions that make up the backbones of all rural communities and are at higher risk because that's where they are. When they tried to work out what was happening amongst these females, the doctors, the vets, medical students, it wasn't hard to work out. We know what's going on. And in fact, this quote that I'm going to read you, interestingly, came from a vet journal where they looked at what was happening with doctors because there's more doctors to study. And what they said was, by far the largest and most frequent gender-related source of stress identified by female junior doctors is the conflict they feel between their career and their marital and family life. And this is strongly linked to depression. In short, stress puts a barrier between our female professionals and their support networks and interferes with their natural feminine expression of being a wife and a mother. And that leads to depression. There's another aspect of this I want to touch on, and that's again in the world of medicine. There are 2 professions that stand out and having a greater risk of suicide, and that's anaesthetists and my specialty of psychiatry. Why? Well, anaesthetists have means, like vets have means. Psychiatrists, a bit different. You see, we think that there can't be anything more. We can't be helped if we've become clinically depressed because we're supposed to know how to treat that. And so we find ourselves giving up because we can't imagine that people have more to offer. Now, over the years I've been treating vets, and I've been treating them for a while now. In fact, I've been treating two kinds of vets. I have an interest in trauma therapy, so I treat a lot of war veterans. And it occurred to me that vets and war veterans have something profoundly in common. They both experience the death of the ones they care about, often unnecessarily. Now, we know how that works for war veterans, but how does it work for vets? And I've had a number of vets explain this to me over the years. And when I looked at the literature is saying the same thing. Vets have a very unusual job. They trained to be committed to the care and welfare of animals. But too often, what they have to do is let the animal die. Or, worse still, they actually have to kill the animal. So here they've chosen a profession where they're looking after these animals. And they have to, a lot of the time, actually kill the animals they're caring about. You know, that would be like having one of my patients come to me and say, you know, the treatment for my husband, it's getting a bit expensive. You know, could we maybe just put him to sleep? Let him go off gently? So this got me thinking, and I started digging into the research deeper. When you surveyed vets around euthanasia, 93% of them are in favour of euthanasia in humans. Now that is way above the general population, way above the position of the medical fraternity. But what's going on? I think you can probably see what's happening here. When your job is euthanasia, then it changes the way in which you see life and death. This quote came from an English journal called the Veterinary Record. And it says on this issue, this altered attitude to death through exposure to euthanasia may then facilitate self-justification and lower their inhibitions towards perceiving suicide as a solution to their own problems. See the progression here? They live a life where euthanasia is normal. And then when they have a problem and suicidal thoughts come up, as they do for most people, the boundaries, the defences against killing themselves are much, much lower than for you or I. Now, Oliver's going to come up here in a moment. I don't know how many of you know Oliver Liyou. He's a local vet. And he's going to tell you his story. Now, this isn't something you're going to hear very often, particularly in this way, because Oliver was my patient. And so you're going to have the opportunity to hear about this from both sides of what he went through and how I thought about it. So let me just tell you a little bit about Oliver's story. Oliver graduated to Goolawah State High as the school captain. He got into university at the very young age of 16 to study vet. While there, he played A-grade rugby league for the university team. He graduated with first-class honours and an award as the top final year student in large animal medicine and surgery. In short, Oliver was the classic overachiever. I want you to keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that. Now, there's some ethical issues here. Firstly, can I say that Oliver has been well now for some years and hasn't required my treatment. In fact, the first contact I've had with Oliver was him asking me if I would come and speak to you tonight. He is more than able to give informed consent. But what Oliver wants to do is, of course, try and shift the culture around reaching out for help. Now, it takes courage to do what Oliver's about to do. So I'm going to ask him to come up here, and I'd like you to make him very welcome, please.
Is there bar service up here? Time for a drink. Yeah, right. Mates helping mates. I knew you'd have one. You owe me a few anyway. You're always good for one, Ray. So everyone has a story, right? A story about how mental health problems have affected them or their family or friends. In the service of increasing awareness, I've been invited to speak tonight about my story. So here it is. No one's immune to the potential disasters associated with mental health, and neither was I. The question is not whether the black dog comes visiting you, but how you choose to deal with it when it comes sniffing around your household. Sometimes it wanders off, sometimes it decides to stay a while. Since before puberty, I experienced a strange comfort from thinking that if life got too difficult or serious, suicide was an option. It was a very comforting and familiar thought pattern in my mind, popping up on a regular basis between the ages of 10 and 33. But it was my secret. I never did anything about getting rid of it, as I knew I would never act on it, for I knew how devastating my death would be to my family and friends. It was November 2005. I was 33 years old, married with 3 boys under 5 years of age. My business was booming, but I could not keep up with the demands of being a husband, father, vet, and wannabe businessman. Working 80 or 100 hours a week, being pulled in many directions, stress just ate away at my soul. My marriage started to fall apart, and I could not keep up with the rapid growth and cash flow demands of my young business. When I think back to the 2 days leading up to the suicide attempt, I vividly remember isolating myself from others, thinking in tunnel vision sort of way with very strong self-talk voices of, "You've tried everything possible, Oliver, and still failed. You've been seeing a clinical psychologist now for 18 months to help you cope. You've been spending $20,000 a year for a good accountant to help you with your business getting it sorted. This is your destiny. You've lived a full life, did your best, and you always knew that this was how your life on earth was meant to end, didn't you? Just do it, and then you'll become an angel. And always be there for your wife and 3 boys to look after them. It's time to go, Oliver. Just do it, and you will help lots of people." I remember my mood during those 2 days of lead up was to pull back, isolate from others, and wait until everyone had left home that morning. I was calm. It was in my mind the only way forward. Looking back, it's really concerning just how this seemed to be so logical in my mind. My mind at the time had concluded that I'd tried my best, failed, and now it was time to move on to plan B. Easy. Through a series of miracles and modern technology, it seemed, I survived. My wife at the time read my goodbye text as soon as I sent it, but she was an hour away. She phoned my brother, who was working 10 minutes away, and he drove to my home in 5 minutes. I was unconscious on my back, barely breathing. He'd recently completed a first aid course, so I was familiar with CPR, and he did this while phoning the ambulance and managed to keep me alive until they arrived and took over. The whole home rapidly became a crime scene. Police, detectives, ambulancemen, fire brigade, people in biosecurity suits. I owe my life to my ex-wife and my brother. The scars left in my family's mind who witnessed these scenes will be with them forever. I'm greatly sorry for this and always will be. For I witnessed none of it. I was unconscious and taken by ambulance and helicopter to Lismore Base ICU. My family went through hell during the 5 days. I laid in a coma on life support. They were advised to prepare for the worst, that I only had 5% chance of making a full recovery and that I'd likely have brain damage and other problems. They were asked if they wanted to donate my organs. I don't know what that'd be good for, but if I didn't make it. But by some miracle, I did come out of the coma and made a full recovery. And when I woke, I was informed of the events of the past week, and I fully realised the magnitude of the mistake I had made, and finally came to accept that I needed to get myself sorted out properly, once and for all. I first needed to apologise to family and friends for what I'd done and what I'd put them through. And I vividly remember my 3 beautiful boys, aged 6, 4 and 18 months, walking together, all up the holding hands down the hospital corridor to visit me in the ICU. At that stage I couldn't walk, but their smiles lifted my spirits. It's the most empowering and enduring vision I have of the whole experience, and that was the wake-up call that I needed. They needed their dad to get better, learn a lot of new life skills, and help guide them through the rigours of life. Ironically, our youngest son Owen had with him a little soft toy that he got for his first birthday 6 months earlier. It was a little dog, black in colour, and Owen named him Black Dog. Black Dog was a valued member of our family for several years as he went everywhere with Owen. Within 2 weeks of the suicide attempt, I was very fortunate to have finally found a caring psychiatrist in Dr George Blair-West, who I felt believed in me and could help me get better again, rebuild my life, marriage, business and reputation. There are also some awesome psych nurses who gave me tips on how to re-enter society, knowing how publicised my suicide attempt would be in a small community like Grafton. I knew there'd be some people who would judge me negatively, and I certainly lost some clients from my business. I enrolled in an 8-week CBT cognitive behaviour therapy course, and it was easily the most enlightening and liberating 2 months of learning that I ever did. And I owe a lot of my new thought patterns about life to that course. I continued to see Dr George on an ongoing basis for the next 5 years, and he was able to help me with all aspects of my mental health, including my relationships, my diets, the raising of my 3 boys and my medication. Words cannot describe how grateful I am for not dying on that day back in 2005, and the incredible family, friends, clients and professionals who have all supported me in my recovery. Make no mistake, I still have good days and bad, but by and large life is good. I've had the wonderful experience of seeing my 3 boys, Jack, Ben and Owen, grow up, and to have a patient, beautiful, loving and caring partner in Carolyn, and have a great team of dedicated employees over here at the front table who help me every day to help directly and indirectly thousands of horses to live better lives through our business. It's not one day goes by when I don't remind myself how damn lucky I am that I survived a deeply flawed strategy that my mind offered up to me back on that day in 2005. We residents of the Clarence Valley are truly blessed to live in one of the best climates in the world, in the luckiest country in the world, when it comes to lifestyle opportunity and great people. So let's work together on this problem and chase with big sticks any black dogs that come sniffing around our back doors, because they can sneak up on you, lunge quickly and bite very hard. Thank you.
You know, I don't think I need to make the point that it would have been an enormous loss if you'd got that right.
I screw up occasionally.
Yeah. Now, I get emotional about this at one level because I know that for every story of Oliver's where he can stand here and tell you about it, and the life that he's gone on to lead since, there are hundreds and hundreds of people who can't tell us that story of how they survived because they didn't make it. A lot of people dismiss these stories. They say, you know, oh, well, they're probably a bit weak, either in the head or whatever we mean when we think of people as being weak. But remember, A-grade rugby league player, school captain, first class honours graduate. He was the pin-up boy for health professionals. And there's some interesting research showing is that the more intelligent and capable you are, the more at risk of suicide you are. Now, half of the 6 letters in the word stress are S's. And there's another word with 3 S's in it. This is a particularly cumbersome segue into the second half of this story. The second word is obsessional. Now I want to talk about the personalities that we typically find amongst these kinds of health professionals that stress acts upon. You need to understand both sides of this if you want to understand the complexity of what we're up against. In psychiatry, we call it the obsessional personality type. What is it? Well, I'm sure there's many of you in this room. Obsessionals are very good at organising information, studying it, recalling it. They take pride in efficiency. They pursue order and excellence. And they work hard under pressure. And who loves that constellation of personality traits? Well, schools, universities. They're lauded, encouraged. Now, add stress to the obsessional professional. You see, what an obsessional does when they experience stress is they turn it into something different. They turn it into pressure. And then what do they do with the pressure? They work harder. Now, that's fine if we're at university, school, and the exams are going to be over in 2 or 3 weeks. But what if it's life? And your solution to being under pressure is to work harder. Because the obsessional is trained, has perfected the art of not feeling stress. They notice it, sure. I say, I'm a bit stressed. But it starts to evolve, it starts to eat away at them. It comes out emotionally, burnout, depression, or it comes out physically. They start seeing their GP for their gastric reflux. They're found to have high blood pressure, having frequent recurrent viral illnesses. The relationship between stress and physical illness is no longer a debate. It's only a matter of degree. So the obsessional becomes very good at ignoring, not taking any notice, and yes, working harder. You might have heard the metaphor, the story of what happens if you boil a frog. Now, humour me, this is my only vaguely veterinarian metaphor. But the story goes, if you take a frog and you put it into a pot of boiling water, it just jumps out again. But if you take our little friendly ectotherm, my other new veterinary word, and you put our little green Kermit into a pot of nice warm water and you just slowly heat it until the water boils, then apparently our little froggy stays there until, well, frog legs are served. So the point being that you've got to get out of the pot. And the obsessional is really good at hanging in there. They're really good at hanging in there. To the obsessional, the solution, if they were there with the frog, it'd be swim harder, go on. But it's not going to solve the problem. You've got to get the frog out. Which brings us to, I haven't got time to cover all of the issues that we need to think about in this space, but there's a couple I want to cover. And that is the need for anybody when they're under stress. They have to take time out of the stress. They have to get out of the pot and they have to go and do something else that is not anything to do with that stressful environment. And preferably they want to do it with their friends, family. They want it to be relaxing. They want to have fun. something that doesn't come easily to your typical obsessional professional. One of the things I do when I'm working with obsessionals, and I did this with Oliver, you can actually harness the obsessional personality in the right direction, because they're very driven, and what you've got to do is try and grab that and use it to help them change in therapy. And Oliver did exactly that. So yes, you've got to find other things to do. You know, find a hobby, a pursuit. You know, obsessionals aren't very good at doing nothing, so when you say go home and relax, they don't know what you're talking about. They look at you as though you're speaking a different language. But if you teach them to go fishing, or remind them to go fishing, you don't have to teach them, or some other pursuit, whatever it is, but you've got to go and do something else. And for the obsessionals amongst you, the best argument I can give you for why you need to go and do something else instead of work harder, it's because of some really interesting research that I've done that I haven't got time to talk about tonight, which is about how the human mind best solves the most complex problems it's dealing with when it's not dealing with the complex problems that are troubling you. Who's had the experience here of trying to solve a complex problem, working away hard at it, and then going off and doing something completely different, or maybe just going to sleep and then waking up in the morning or while you're doing something else going, that's what I've got to do with that problem? Show of hands, who's had that experience of solving a problem when you're not trying to solve the problem? Right. It's incredibly common. And the thing I'm really interested in is how do we actually perfect that? Because there's something really, really cool about doing that. But for the obsessionals amongst you, I want you to remember that you will solve not the easy or the less complex problems when you're not trying to work on the problem, but the most complex problems when you're not trying to work on the problem. So the obsessional needs to be what I call militantly quarantining time to do things other than the thing that is causing the stress. You have to get out of the pot. There's one other thing that Oliver's story takes us to, and that is that the nature of the obsessional is to distance. See, that pursuit of order and excellence that I mentioned, the pursuit of order and excellence takes you away from other human beings. Why? Because other human beings have an annoying habit of not doing what you want them to do when you want them to do it. And when you're stressed and you need to get stuff done, it's actually easier to pull away from other people and not have them in your face, annoying you, slowing you down. And this is when they say to me, yeah, I haven't seen much of my friends. I've been pulling away from my family. They don't understand what I'm going through. And now something very profound has happened. This is the beginning of the downward spiral, because they've started to pull away from the only people who can help them. See, Oliver gave a very clear description of something that was the most profound clinical finding from my research, and that is how the human mind, when it gets very, very stressed and turns to suicide, it collapses down its perception. It is unable to think of all of the different options that are available to it that mind can think of when it is well. It's called collapsing of perception. It's a tunnel vision. And it seems incredibly logical to go to the next step, which is to kill yourself. It seems to be like a very clever solution, a brave solution at one level. But it begins with that separation, with that isolation. Understanding that concept of perception narrowing means that if I can give you one take-home message, just remember the worst time to commit suicide is when you're suicidal. Wait till you're better, till you're well enough to be able to think clearly and get help. I had a patient call me once. It was late at night. No patient ever calls you when they're suicidal in your lunch break, when you've got time to help them and organise care and appointments and stuff. No, they always call you, but that's okay. And he was clearly very suicidal. And I got him through that. And I saw him a couple of days later, and I said to him, I said, because he thanked me, he thanked me for saving his life. And I said, well, what did I do? Because I was kind of interested in which of the clever things I'd said or done had made the difference, had brought him back from the brink. And he sat and he thought about it, and he scratched his chin and he said, you answered the phone. That was when I learned something that I'd been taught but I hadn't believed. The power of just being with somebody. See, I thought I had to do something clever. Even as a psychiatrist, I'd been out 10 years at that stage. But no, what made the difference for him was that, well, I did more than answer the phone, of course, but it wasn't anything I said that was particularly clever. It was just that I listened, and here's the important word, I connected with him. Remember, we've got this isolation that is pulling them away from us. And what we need to do is to push back in the other direction, gently, by connecting. In short, it's not about the clever words. It's not about the solution. It's about the connection. A couple of quick tips. Never say to somebody who's distressed, I understand. Never, ever say that. Even if you've had a similar experience, it won't be the same as theirs. It sounds very ingenuous. Most people will react to that with, how could you possibly understand? No, just do the opposite. Say to them, I can't understand what this must be like for you, but I'd like to try. Another tip, how to raise this issue. People worry about talking to people about being suicidal. Here's a phrase that you can try. People going through your kinds of experiences often have thoughts of suicide. Are you? Don't worry, you cannot put the idea into their head. I don't think I've seen a person who has been seriously suicidal, particularly a professional, who hasn't thought about it. They might dismiss it after they've thought about it, but they've thought about it, and they often want to connect and talk about it. Now, I want to conclude by coming back to a point that I made earlier about how we psychiatrists have a bad habit of killing ourselves, and that we do that because we think, well, what more help is there? I'm the expert. You see, psychiatrists get tunnel vision too. We're not immune, same process. But we ask the wrong question, which is what our tunnel vision takes us to. The question we shouldn't be asking is, what could that person know that I don't? The question is, who? It's about connecting with another person again, of course. You see, you don't need somebody who knows more than you do. You just need somebody who doesn't have your mind if you're suicidal. You just need a different mind. Another mind that can organise help. Now, of course, we do need the person who's suicidal to allow you to organise that help. And perhaps some of the most difficult work that I do is amongst relatives who tried to help somebody who then killed themselves. We can't blame ourselves if we've tried and they didn't let us. But at these times, that's typically when, in psychiatry, we need to hospitalise somebody. We don't lock them up and give them shock treatment. We just lock them up until they get better. Because one of the other things about that narrowing of perception is it leaves people thinking that this will never change. Now, there are very few guarantees I can give in psychiatry, but this is one of them. This too shall pass. Everything passes, everything moves on, every emotion comes to an end. Even if you have clinical, major depression, we know from the research, if we don't treat it, you'll get better in 12 to 18 months. If we treat it, we can do a lot better than that. Bipolar disorder. People get manic and they get depressed. If we do nothing, they will come out of the phase. This too shall pass. It's one of the only things that I can guarantee. So, what a person needs the most is just another person. Friend, family member, maybe a therapist. And this is what I think of as the power of one other. So, 3 messages. Try never to forget that the worst time to commit suicide is when you're suicidal. Militantly quarantine time, just as you would militantly work. Militantly quarantine time to do something outside of the stressful situation. Preferably do it with friends, family, loved ones. Sometimes you need to go and recharge and do something on your own. Ride a horse for 2 days and spend some time out with Mother Nature. And finally, I want you to remember, it's not about the solution, it's about the connection. Never forget the power of the other one. Thank you.